little over 4 years ago, I arrived here in the woods of Western Maine. And it was really several leaps of faith at the time. The first one was the leap of faith of homesteading. It was this series of physical activities that I had to learn how to do that I'd never done before, and I really wasn't sure if I would be able to. And the second leap of faith, which is possibly counterintuitive because it was the harder leap of faith for me, was the decision to film the entire process. I'd never done anything quite like that artistically before, and it really did feel like a big leap for me to do it. The initial impetus was quite simple, to just come out here, start with nothing, which was just 10 acres of raw land and my car, and to start building and filming and see what would happen. So I first should just say, like, those were two leaps of faith that I took without even fully understanding why I was doing it. It was largely an intuitive decision. I just turned 50. I think I was kind of going through my version of the beginning of a midlife crisis. I really wanted to take some kind of action that felt meaningful. And this was the action that I decided on. And so part of those leaps of faith was recognizing that even though I didn't know fully why I had chosen to do it, that I was trusting that through action and time, that it would become clear to me why I had decided to do this. And in fact, it did, which I can get into in a little bit. So in that time, I have built 2 buildings. I have mastered wood heat. I've felled some really large trees. I built a composting toilet system, drainage system, and acquired lots of other skills. And what I would say is there's still a lot more that I could learn. And I may. But the decision I've made is that the portion of this experiment where I'm filming it, that has come to an end. And it's not because there's not more I could film. It just really more feels like I have said everything that I wanted to say, and I would kind of be starting to repeat myself. And I really don't want to do that. I want the work to stand as it is, and it feels complete. And so this is going to be my final video. It's possible I may film other videos in the future, but that'll just kind of be an intuitive thing if I feel moved to do it or not. The regular filming process is going to come to a close. So the purpose of this final video is not to talk about any of the physical accomplishments I've made in the external world, because those are really well documented in all the previous videos that I made. The purpose of this video is to talk about the internal things that happened, how I changed, how I grew, what I learned, what philosophies evolved out of the last 4 years of this work. I'd say the most foundational thing I learned out here is that there are certain things that I cannot fully learn without experiencing them through my body. And what I mean by that is that I can certainly understand something conceptually, and that can be very valuable. But there are additional layers of knowing, understanding, that can actually be more like baked into the cells of my body. And that only can happen if I really physically engage with something. So I'll see if I can offer some examples that would illustrate that. Let's take my relationship with water. So before I moved out here, I lived in a condo, and my relationship with water was pretty simple. I didn't have a whole lot of depth. I mean, I turned a faucet and water came out. I had understood conceptually that water was really important to survival, and I drank it when I needed it. And that was really about all the more, I would say, relationship I had with water in terms of my survival. But when I got here, several things happened that completely changed my relationship with water, and they were much more physical events. So the first one was when I tried to hand dig a well. And that was one of the very few things that I attempted to do out here that I just completely failed at. I was able to dig down about 8 feet, and then I got stuck, and I just never got finished. But it was a grueling process. The attempt to dig that water, to drill into the earth, and to try to get to a place where I could get this life-sustaining substance. And it wasn't just the physical labor, and how much that loaded into my body, that information about how hard it can be to access this resource, but I also failed. So not only is it hard, but it might have, in that case, it was just sort of, at least at that time, physically impossible. And that certainly shifted how I thought about water, that it could be something that is just not attainable. And I had never had that experience before. So it became much more precious to me as a resource after that particular experience. And then the other one is, failing the well, I was still having to hand haul water onto my property. Sometimes from my neighbor's well, sometimes I would take 5-gallon jugs into town, but that was still me hand hauling all of the water that I used out here for brushing my teeth, for taking a drink of water at night, for showering. That's probably the most of the water that I used. And 5 gallons is not a whole lot. I mean, you can blow through that pretty quick if you're just taking it out of a shower head or out of a tap. But because I had to hand carry it in, every time I picked up one of those 5-gallon jugs, I could feel the weight of it. It's probably about 45 pounds, and it would dig into my hand, and my legs would start to get tired as I hiked it along to get it into my house. And that, again, just really tuned my entire system to signal me that this is a valuable resource, that I want to take extra care when I use it. And I didn't even have to try. I just started naturally, because of that physical feedback loop, to be extremely not cautious, I would say, but like mindful of the water that I would use. I would use the minimum amount I needed to get any job done, because I knew as soon as I ran out, I would have to go haul more. So that was just a huge shift between this, mental concept of that, hey, water is important for survival, to this much more like it lives in my body, just how precious water is, and how much more I want to treat it as a precious resource. The next one is my relationship with cold. So I had done some cold exposure before I got here, but it got a lot more intense after I got here, and especially because when I started here, I was in a spot where the weather was pretty warm, so I was showering outside. And as the weather got colder, that got a little more and more difficult, and I just kept trying to see how much further I could go to continue to keep showering outside. And I actually got to the point, I remember the exact moment when I had this realization, where I had challenged myself. It had gotten quite cold. I think it was a day in January where it was about 20 degrees outside, and I was like, I'm gonna push myself. I'm gonna see if I can do this. And if it was rough, I was pretty lit up afterwards, but I made it, and I felt satisfied about that. And then I just had this thought, I wonder if I look at the average highs and lows for the year, what are they in Maine? I just hadn't done the research, so I pulled it up on my phone. I'm start looking, and I saw that the coldest month of the year is in January, and that the average high in January was 28 degrees. Well, I had just showered in 20-degree weather, and the light bulb just went off. It was like, oh my God, I can shower outdoors all year round here. All I have to do is just pick my days during the colder months, and I can definitely always shower outside. And in the beginning, it felt, rough. As I got more fully acclimated, it was the opposite. It became completely invigorating to go out in these colder temperatures and take a shower and just feel this aliveness coursing through my whole body. So for sure, my whole relationship with cold changed. There was something about, always being in a constant temperature in a modern home that I think sort of deacclimates the body's ability to handle temperature ranges. And I got a lot of that back being out here. So as an example, I could be out here in a t-shirt and shorts, and it could be anywhere between 40 degrees and 85 degrees, and I am comfortable. It's not just that I can tolerate it, I'm literally comfortable. And I never would have been able to say that 4 years ago. 85 would have been too hot, and 40 degrees would have certainly been too cold. I would have been shivering the entire time. So that is really quite a testament to how much can change with the physical engagement. I got more capacity through that. And it also changed, like I said, my entire relationship with the cold. It went from something that I resisted to something that I got excited about and felt enlivened by. And the last example is, I would say, I was going to say my relationship with heat, which is kind of true, but it was even more specifically my relationship with the wood stove that I had. So most of the time in the colder months, I was burning wood heat to be able to stay warm. And the stove that I have, because my place is pretty small, it's only 265 square feet, I couldn't buy a really big stove because it would have just made the place like a sauna. So I ended up getting a quite nice but small Vermont Castings wood stove. And the burn time on this stove was not enough to make it overnight most of the time. I mean, a good long burn, maybe 8 hours, but usually it was probably more like 6 to 7. And so this meant that I was going to be going to bed, you know, and outside it's 5 degrees or whatever, and at some point my fire is probably going to go out. And I remember having this real concern of like, I'm gonna wake up freezing because, you know, I'm gonna be dead asleep and the fire's gonna go out, and then I'm gonna have to get up at 4 in the morning and build a fire, and that's gonna totally suck. And I remember being really worried about that in the beginning. But something really shocking happened. And it still amazes me to say that this is true, that in 4 years, I never have once slept through my fire going out. I mean, it had gotten fairly low a couple times, but invariably, I would somehow, my body would just somehow know, hey, get up and put some more wood in the fire because you need to, right? And, you know, I don't know if it was some larger intuitive thing that had happened, or if my body had gotten, like I remember I had said, my temperature tolerance got bigger. Well, I think it's also possible that my temperature sensitivity had gotten greater too. So possibly I could be dead asleep and my unconscious, and my system could signal me when the outside temperature outside my body had dropped enough, and then I would just wake up and go put wood in the fire. It's really kind of a miracle. You know, it's like a totally, and I see that as a totally different relationship with staying warm and heat than I had in a modern home. In a modern home, there was a thermostat. I would push a button or you know, twiddle a thing, and when you do that, you just say, this is the temperature I want, and then it magically stays there. And there really almost was no relationship that I had with heat other than I make the temperature that I want. Which was not very deep, to be honest with you. It was just convenient. But out here, I really did have a relationship with heat and with my stove. I tended to the fire, and it tended to my need for heat. And that is a very different experience than just twiddling a dial and having something magically happen. Next, I'd like to talk about what I would say were the two main phases in the 4-year journey that I've had. And I would simply call phase 1 the bootstrapping phase, which lasted about 2 years, and then something like the fine-tuning phase or the optimization phase that lasted in years, that came into play in years 3 and 4. So the bootstrap phase is one where what I would say is that there weren't many choices available. There were things I needed to get done, and I didn't really have much choice if I wanted to have anything like a livable situation. You know, as I had said before, I arrived on a bare piece of land and my car. And what I had hoped for in that first season was to be in some kind of a home before the first snow flew. And there was not a lot of creative options available. It was just sort of like, this is what you have to do, and you better get it done in time, which is intense, very intense, oftentimes overwhelming and stressful to have to face. And in addition to that, I think just to unpack it a little, you know, what is it like to be out here with almost nothing, right? To be in the middle of this bootstrap phase. So I've got a couple of things I could say about that might illustrate that. The first one is something that it's weird to say, because I just never would have imagined having this experience before I got out here. But I have learned the value and have tremendous gratitude for a level, flat surface to set stuff on. You know, basically a shelf. And the reason for that is because there were quite a few weeks out here when I first got here that I didn't have that. You know, I had all the ground here was uneven, and I was still trying to get things up and running. I was trying to get a composting toilet system up and running. I was trying to figure out how I can shower and just really take care of my basic needs. And I over and over again would like want to set something somewhere, and I wouldn't have anything at like waist height, first of all, to set something, and it certainly wouldn't be level, so I would constantly be setting a glass down or whatever, and it would fall over, and it was just absolutely maddening. And I just had never, in my previous life, had never occurred to me how goddamn valuable it is to have a flat level surface. And so it wasn't long before I got one, because it just became so frustrating to not have one. So after the first couple of hemlocks came down and I had milled some boards, that was the first thing that I built with the wood that we had created out of those trees. Was I built a shelf, and it's just hard to describe how happy I was to have a shelf. And that also points to something else, which is, you know, what my relationship was just having a home, period. I mean, if you had asked me 5 years ago, you know, why do you need a home? I'm not so sure how deep my answer would have been. It certainly would have been something like, well, I don't want to sleep in my car, I need a place to live. But I believe I've developed a much better understanding of like what you get when you buy a home. And really, it's not just that it keeps rain off your head, or, you know, you can turn a faucet. What you're actually paying for when you rent a place or when you buy a place is you're paying for a set of solved problems, like a lot of solved problems that, you know, human history and knowledge has baked in to this special place where all of these things have been taken care of, and you just pay some money and you get hundreds or thousands of these little problems that have been solved for you, so you don't have to deal with them. A flat level surface to set stuff on would be an example of that. So another component to the bootstrapping phase is that I had come from about a 550 square foot condo when I was living in Portland. And when I got here, I was sleeping in my car. So I did some quick math on the car, and I believe the square footage inside that car was about 32 square feet. Which is a huge downgrade, right? And of course I felt it in the beginning. I mean, it was really, really small. But I slept in that car for 5 months, and probably about somewhere between month 2 and 3, what started to happen was that I just started to feel like, well, this is the new normal. And it wasn't a thought I had, it was just sort of a sense, like just doing it over and over again. It was about, you know, the 2 or 3 month mark where I just noticed that, oh, this is just the new normal now. My whole system had kind of acclimated to that. And I was really glad that happened, because the building that I ended up building, the Yome, is 265 square feet. Well, just doing some comparisons here, the studio condo that I moved out of was about 550 square feet, and it was a quite nice condo. And so if I had moved straight from there into a 265 square foot tent, I think it probably would have felt like a downgrade. But instead, I moved from that nice condo into a 32 square foot car for 5 months. That became the new normal. And when I moved into my Yome, it felt palatial. I didn't have to convince myself that it was an upgrade. It just felt huge. And I felt so grateful to have it. And I think the real lesson there was that I don't remember the name of the principle, but it's kind of like when you have a certain intensity of experience, your brain just acclimates to that and it becomes the new normal. There's totally a term for it, and I can't think of it. Look it up if you want to know what it means. But that's a very common human characteristic, that you kind of tend to acclimate to peak experiences and they become normalized. But one of the things I'd never heard of before was that there is this ability, like I kind of proved to myself there's ability to reset those expectations. Now, you know, so like the way I know how to do it now, which is what happened, is they can be reset if you just deny yourself something, right? If you go through the discomfort of pushing yourself into an experience that is much less what you want or much less comfortable for a while, and allow your system to reset, then you get this magical moment where you get a brand new experience of being grateful or some sense of growth and expansion or surprise that you had previously lost because your system had just been acclimated to it. And so I really look at that as a treasure. It's kind of like a new strategy or trick that I've learned, that if I ever feel like I've gotten to a point of where I've plateaued in my gratitude or enjoyment for something, I can make the choice to consciously, engage with some degree of discomfort for some period of time and reset my expectations so that I can regain and re-experience that sense of gratitude. The second phase is, again, it was more like a fine-tuning. It was a fine-tuning phase, where, as I said, in the first phase, I really didn't have a lot of choices. There's shit that had to get done, and I did the things that had to get done so that I could get what I needed. But after about 2 years, I had all those basic things done, and I could begin to make more choices to kind of locate what I've since termed like the sweet spot in my experience, which is I wanted to find a way that I could still stay connected with things, but not have it, be quite so brutal or take up quite so much time, things like that. And so a couple examples of that would be, I dug a drainage trench clear around my property. Now, I didn't, it wasn't necessary to have it. I could survive, but in the wetter seasons, it got really muddy down by my house. And I just wanted to be able to, instead of having to manage all that stuff manually every year, I wanted to build a system that would kind of manage that water for me. And so I did that work to dig the drainage trench around. And now for the last 2 years, that trench just does the work of managing most of the water that comes on to my property. Very gratifying. The work itself was pretty drudgerous, I guess I would say, but I get the payback of it all the time now, and I feel the gratitude that I did that work all the time now, because I just don't have to deal with the water incursion the way that I used to. Another example of finding a sweet spot was in my relationship to firewood, the wood that I would put in the stove. And when I first got here, I just kind of had stuff laying around in wood piles, which of course worked, but it was very inconvenient. I had to, hike kind of a long way to be able to get to the thing, and it would snow on top of it, and I have to dust it off, and it just felt like I'm having to do a little more work here than I would like to do. I mean, I loved and still do love the idea, or the experience of putting my hands on a piece of wood, feeling the weight of it. Feeling the heat of the fire on my face as I put that wood into the stove. Those are wonderful experiences. But the part where I'm managing, the wood, where I have to cut it down, then pile it, then move it again, it was just like, this is a little more than I want to deal with over and over again. And that was when I decided to build this kind of movable firewood storage system. And I settled on these sort of metal cages that are called IBC totes, and I've got the system basically up and running. And the way that works is the goal would be that I only touch the wood twice. It's right first when I cut the tree, I cut it down, get it into firewood shape, and the first touch is into the bin, and then I can use the tractor to move that bin anywhere I want, and eventually close to my house when I'm ready to burn. And then the second touch of that wood is when I pluck it out of the bin, close by, right? So I don't have to walk, a long way through the snow to get to the wood, and pluck it out of the bin and then put it into my fire. And since I had multiple of those bins, I can kind of rotate them throughout the year to be able to have wood all winter and have it close by and not have to handle it so often. So that's kind of another example of figuring out a way to keep what I wanted, which was that contact with the wood, but not have it be so brutal, the handling of it, to get that experience. As part of my time out here, and that engagement with trying to find some balance between being connected to the elements of survival versus having enough comfort and convenience for my life to feel balanced, I kind of came upon this philosophy or understanding of comfort and convenience. I believe that my relationship with comfort and convenience as a human is quite similar to my relationship with salt, sugar, and fat. And I think it's pretty well understood at this point that evolutionarily, our cravings for salt, sugar, and fat were actually put in place by evolution because these were precious resources back when finding nutrients in food was hard. And so we developed these cravings for these things because when you found them, you wanted to consume them. They were a huge part of increasing your survival. So we've got this deeply implanted drive to get those things because they were valuable for us for so long. And then, modernity comes along and you can go to McDonald's or any other fast food place and get as much salt, sugar, and fat as you want. But that initial biological drive is still in place. And so there comes a point, I kind of think of it like a bell curve, where back when things were really hard, getting more salt, sugar, and fat probably improved your health and vitality. But at some point, as we were able to get that more and more easily, we reached the peak of like, hey, this is the amount of salt, sugar, and fat that is like going to make you the healthiest. But the biological drive is still there. So I think it's quite easy, and I certainly do it too, to keep eating it. And because of that craving. But yet when you go beyond that sort of point of maximum benefit, now you're making yourself less healthy by following that biological drive. I kind of feel like a similar pattern happens with comfort and convenience. So just to lay it out, 50,000 years ago or whatever, when life was really hard, getting more comfort and making things more convenient was like a huge survival advantage. So it was probably baked into us in this deep biological drive to seek comfort and convenience, to make things as easy as possible, basically, because things were already so hard. And again, so fast forward into modern times, and now you can click a button on Amazon and get something 2 days later, just magically arrives. Well, for a long while, that drive to get more comfort and convenience was actually making ourselves more vital and more alive and more healthy. But at some point, you're like at the maximum of that, and you start down the other side. And I know for sure for me that I was beyond that point. I was definitely had too much comfort and convenience in my life, and it had affected my vitality, especially in a really negative way. And so by peeling off some of those layers, I was able to reclaim some of my vitality. And I wasn't, that's an example of like when I first had this idea to come out here, I had no idea that was something that was going to happen. It just wasn't even in my mind. It was a beautiful surprise that I was able to do that. And it was quite clear when it happened. I mean, it is harder out here. It is less comfortable, but I feel more alive. And I would take that trade any day of the week. But it's definitely more challenging to make that trade when you're in a situation where the comfort is so much more tempting. And so I kind of feel like, I put myself in a position where it is just less comfortable out here. For me to be more comfortable, I would have to rent another condo probably. And so while I'm out here, a perfect example is like it's, 10 o'clock at night, I come home, it's 10 degrees outside, I don't have a fire going yet. That's uncomfortable. I don't like it, it's irritating. I'm cold, I'm tired, I want to go to bed, but I have to do the work to build a fire, and that's uncomfortable. And my only rational choice at that point, because of the situation that I've set up, is to build the fire. At that point, I can't be, going, well, I better go buy a condo now because I'm feeling uncomfortable. It's not a decision in the reasonable decision space. And so I've kind of triangulated the decisions that I could make so that there's been enough discomfort and enough, lack of convenience that it keeps that biological temptation to maximize it at a much healthier level for me, and I feel much more alive because of it. And I've tried now, it's kind of shaped how I think about modernity in general, or comfort and convenience in general. It's not that it's a bad thing. I'm definitely not against it. I love it. But instead of just unconsciously accepting something because it feels good and it feels good and it feeds that biological yearning for things to be easy. Instead, I'm much more conscious about it. I'm asking myself, I would say the key question is, what is this comfort and convenience costing me? Of course, I know there's some benefit too, or I know it feels like a benefit because it feels good, but what is it costing me? And with that kind of conscious engagement, I can then calibrate, how I'm gonna choose to interact with something so that I can put it in more of the kind of the sweet spot that I've been talking about. A perfect example is when I decided to get grid power here. My neighbor was getting it in down the road. They were digging right by my house. It was like the perfect time to do it. And I remember mostly, it feels so weird to say this, but I remember the most prevalent feeling that I felt was fear. And the fear was absolutely that something magical had happened to me out here. And I was afraid that if I just took electricity and piped it into my house, I was going to lose some of that. And I didn't want to. And I know I didn't need to have electricity in my house because I just spent, 3 years without it. And so while it made sense, it was definitely the right logical decision to get some kind of power out here, especially since I drive an electric car. I really didn't want to have it in my house. So I wrestled for a while, like, what do I do? And I finally made the decision, like the sweet spot to me felt like, okay, I'm going to put a pole in my furthest parking spot right near the edge of my property. I'm going to put a charger on it. I'm going to put 2 outdoor outlets on it. And that is the closest I want modern electricity to my home right now. And that ended up, I think, being a really great decision because I still have access to it. I can now use a regular vacuum cleaner in that building if I want to. But if I want to use it, I have to bust out 2 extension cords, put them together, run the whole thing. There is some inconvenience to it. And so it's like just enough so that I have the contact with something that I think helps me not feel too overwhelmed out here with too much to do, but just far enough away so that I can stay in contact so that instead of putting in lights in my place, I'll use my oil lamp instead because the vibe of that just feels so much better. Another good example of me finding the sweet spot is in my relationship with food. Now, food was the main thing that I avoided when I first got here. I felt like I took on all kinds of stuff, figuring out waste management, water management, heat, built buildings, built a driveway, did all this stuff. And when I thought about the idea of farming out here, I just always felt overwhelming. And so I just punted on that for a while, I think it was at least the first 3 years, I just didn't even try. But it always bothered me that I hadn't made any attempt to engage with my relationship with food because food obviously a major component to survival, right? And I had made no real engagement to change my relationship with food from what it was, before I'd even got here. And so the first experiment was quite simple. There's a local community garden in a nearby town, and I was gifted a garden bed for that community garden. And I just said, I'm going to take this and work it for a season so that I can begin to have some kind of relationship with food that is other than I go to a store and buy something in a package. And I worked it for, whatever it was, a season, 3 months. And the yield wasn't too great. It was about 4 or 5 salads worth, but the experience was very worthwhile. I really got why people loved gardening. And I got some, it was great to be able to put something in my mouth that I had grown myself instead of just buying it from a store. But I didn't really feel called to continue. Like that particular experiment didn't feel like my personal sweet spot. It still felt a little too far away. That led me to my next experiment, which was the hydroponic garden. And that actually much better satisfied my needs to kind of balance comfort and convenience with modernity. And it really did hit the sweet spot for me because I was still able to have direct contact with food. I've probably managed that thing now for 6 months. And I'm constantly, every day I'm working on it in some fashion, whether it's adding water or trimming plants or eating a delicious salad. But I also get a lot of help from the modern tooling of that. It handles all the water and the light, and that just feels like a really good balance for me. And I guess I've also learned that, depending upon what the survival need is, I have a different kind of sweet spot. I think I'm a lot closer to nature in how I say manage waste or how I manage heat than I am how I manage food. But I'm able to calibrate it. One of the ways I think of it is like I can kind of use modernity to create the right kind of distance between me and nature so that I'm still in the kind of contact with it that I want to be, without it becoming too onerous in whatever way. And that's, obviously that's a real privilege that I can do that. But I couldn't do it before because I wasn't even aware that was a choice. Right now I'm making that conscious choice. I'm saying, what does this comfort cost me? I'm looking for the calibration. I'm looking for where I can bring modernity in to kind of optimize the contact I have with nature and with survival versus convenience. And I found a lot of balance, and that process will probably be ongoing for my whole life, because I still in probably every area I would say I haven't found the absolute perfect sweet spot, but I've gotten a lot closer as time has gone by. Lastly, I just want to talk about kind of I guess I'd call it a grab bag of other sort of insights and philosophical fulcrums and such that I experienced out here that I found valuable, and I hope you all would find either valuable or interesting. So the first one I would call it the satisfaction investment. That's sort of how I'd frame it. And it was really having this experience over and over again of the more effort and maybe even I would say struggle that I put into building something, the more my energy was kind of infused into the thing that I built, and the more satisfaction I got out of it. And I would very much distinguish this from the satisfaction I get out of, say, buying something. What I realized was that I may get enjoyment out of, whatever, my cell phone or my guitar, but the enjoyment from that is really more out of using it. It's a tool. It's a mechanism that I can use to draw enjoyment out of it. But this satisfaction investment piece I'm talking about is a fundamentally different kind of enjoyment. It's like, it's a little woo-woo to say it, but it's sort of like as I invest effort, I'm kind of putting my awareness and energy into the object that I'm creating. And then when that's over, that energy and awareness kind of comes back to me in the form of satisfaction. I can literally get satisfaction directly from the object itself. For example, after I built the bow roof shed, that's quite near to my outdoor shower. And I can honestly say that every morning when I come out to take a shower, I look over at that bow roof shed and I just feel giddy. I feel amazed. I look up and I go, I can't believe I built that. And it's been 2 years since I built that shed, and I still have that feeling every day. And I've never had that feeling about anything that I bought. It's just a qualitatively different kind of feeling. Another really powerful example of that I can think of is that the night that I finished I was really racing that first year to get into the Yome and to be able to sleep inside before the snow fell. So I did get it done, and the very last thing that I did was I hand built a frame for my bed. And so after that was done, I lay down in bed to kind of rest before I fell asleep. And I'm laying there in the bed, and I didn't try to do this. It just sort of happened. I could just feel my awareness like moving down into the bed frame, which I had poured my attention into, and my attention moved down through that. And I could just feel and remember. It was a kind of a remember feeling at the same time, like the work and energy I'd poured into that bed frame. And then my awareness moved from that into the flooring that I had laid. I could feel what that was like. Then into the subfloor I had nailed down, then into the frame underneath that subfloor that I had put together in the hot months of August. And then from that frame into the stones that my excavator partner and I had laid down, then into the gravel the stones were on that I had used a hand tamper to tamp down. It was completely exhausting work. And it was like they were more than just memories. It was like this felt sense that I was moving into those objects and through them deeper and deeper as I was laying there, and then on into the earth. And in that moment, I had never felt so connected to the earth in my life. It was just absolutely phenomenal. It's hard to describe in words, but it was sort of like all of that awareness I had poured into all those different things was there, and it was connecting them all together, and I could just move through them all and feel connected to all of it all the way down into the earth. And that is so far beyond the conceptual description of satisfaction. One of the other things I learned with just so much physical engagement out here, what I'd say is it helped surface this way I related to the universe that has been with me my whole life and is actually really unhealthy. And I was sort of probably always dimly aware of it, but all the physical work out here just brought it into such relief. And the simple way to say it is that for as long as I can remember, I've had this relationship with the physical universe. I mean, I'm really glad I don't have this relationship with humans, but I definitely have had this relationship with the physical universe, that it's kind of out to get me. You know, that it's not even just that it's this neutral thing, but it's like sort of somehow, maybe not malevolent, but it's like not on my side at all. It's the opposite of on my side. And that's a rough orientation to have with the physical universe. I found myself mad at it all the time. But as I continued to work out here and have so much direct engagement with it, I had these experiences over and over again. The contrast between that relationship I was carrying and just the simplicity of watching nature and me engage with it kind of helped to diffuse and titrate out a lot of that way I saw the universe, you know. And I started having many of these moments like, oh, look at that tree. It just is, you know, and look at the way that water runs. That's just the laws of gravity and water as a fluid responding to it. Things like that, you know. I really continually had these experiences of, I would just call it like the isness of the universe. And as I had more and more of those, as they stacked up more out here, it just began to soften that, you know, sort of, I don't know what I'd call it, like a childhood wound around how, unsafe or hostile the universe is. And it's been a really helpful change. I mean, I feel it's not over yet. You know, it runs very deep in me, so I can't say it's zero, but it's shifted a lot, and I feel a lot more peaceful because of it. And I can tell you that, like, when I run into problems in the physical universe now, I'm able to be much more zen about it. I can just pause and say, much more often I can pause and say, well, this is just what is. This thing broke. That was the physical nature, that it was time for it to break, and now I have to take these physical actions to fix it the way that I want to. Basically, my orientation out here was, if I was going to take on something and I didn't think there was a risk of me getting physically injured or hurting my home, that I was going to do it myself. And so maybe another way to say it is, just because I felt like overwhelmed about how to do it, that wasn't a signal for me to ask for help. My signal to ask for help was much more, do I think I'm going to hurt myself? You know, an example of that would be when I first got here, the first couple of trees that came down, I had my neighbor help me do it. You know, I really was afraid that I was going to hurt myself because these are giant trees and I had never done it before. So that was an example of where I was willing to ask for help. But beyond that, I didn't, and that of course increased the challenge quite a bit. I remember when I put the first 4 bows up in the bow roof shed. I mean, it was actually ridiculous. I really should have asked for help, but I knew I wasn't going to get hurt, and I just thought, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this myself. Even though it was ridiculous, and even though it was quite challenging, when I did pull it off myself, I felt this tremendous reward. And so I think it's kind of I would call it like a high risk, high reward way of looking at it. This calibration of like, okay, am I going to get hurt? No, okay, I'll do it. I'll try to figure out how to do it myself. Is a very challenging way to calibrate, but it yields a lot of reward. And by the way, I'm not exactly recommending that anybody look at it that way. I spent a lot of time, like tuning my intuition, so I actually could get a pretty good sense of if something was dangerous or not. And I think that was why I was able to orient myself like that and challenge myself in so many ways without actually doing any kind of permanent damage to my body. So no permanent damage, but what I will say is, because of the amount of challenge I've taken on, I am a little beat up. And part of this wrap up is really going to be me taking a step back and moving into a space that's more about rest and integration and looking at what I want to do next instead of continually taking on the next challenge. I need to talk about this one particular experience I had, probably was within the last year, I would say. And I really want to share it because it feels so unique. Like, I remember when I had the experience, I thought, how many other people have felt this particular thing that I'm feeling right now? Because it was so unusual. So let me see if I can describe it. So I through the peeling back of, the layers of modernity and getting closer to survival, I gained, I guess what I would say is I gained kind of an increase, not just in my capacity and my vitality, but sort of my connectedness to all of nature, my ability to sense and perceive things. All that just went up. And it went up in a way that I imagine that's what, my ancestors would have felt, something more like what I was feeling as I've acquired these new kind of, sensory and energetic abilities, because I've put myself closer to just basic survival. And so I do feel like I feel some more like our ancestors would when they were, pre-1800s or hunter-gatherers or whatever, but not anywhere near what, those people would feel fully. I would say I got like a taste of it, right? I got some idea, some really felt sense of what it must have been like to be a human back then. And a lot of it I really like. And so I was, kind of sitting with that, and there was this moment, it came all at once. It was like, I know that I don't, whatever this thing that's happening for me, I'm not all the way there. I don't fully feel that what those people in those more difficult and earlier times would have felt. And I don't even think I'm capable of feeling that. And the reason is because I was raised from birth in a modern environment. So like my whole nervous system is been tuned and trained by modernity. And I'm pretty sure I would never be able to get all the way back to that really basic, tribal way of being. And it was in that moment when I realized, like, I got a taste of it, but I know there's more, and I don't think I'll ever be able to fully taste it, that I kind of felt like I had been robbed. Like there was some really basic human birthright that I had been robbed of by living in a modern environment. And I was angry. I remember feeling angry about it. I just need to say, like, this does not mean that I wouldn't have wanted to be raised in modern times. Like, I'm tremendously grateful. On balance, it's certainly a better life. And I feel like I have lost, there's something has been lost because of that. And I really feel that loss now. And I guess I would say I've made some peace with that loss is permanent. And taking all that together, I feel like I'm a more complete person. It's like I at least have a sense of where we came from and what it was like to be a human way back before any of these modern implements came along. The last thing I want to talk about is actually the filming process itself. Way back in the beginning, I said that it was a leap of faith as well for me to decide to film this. And the reason this was a leap of faith is because I had never done anything like this before. I've been a creative person my whole life. I would call myself, an artistic person to some degree. But the way I've used my creativity is I've just sort of joined, and used my creative energy with other people and assisting them in their visions, right? I might, write some music for a singer-songwriter, for example. But I wasn't the one who was carrying the primary vision. Whereas with this project, this has been my vision. I mean, I'm out here setting up the camera shots. The whole idea was mine. I'm filming it. And that was a much different experience. It was a much different creative experience. It felt very vulnerable, to be honest. I guess, I'd never thought this before, but I really was afraid that I was going to put myself out there like this and that nobody was going to care, or I was going to be terrible at it. Like I just didn't know. And that whole thing was extremely scary. And I remember feeling that fear before I even got here. Like even when I first decided I was going to do this, that fear was already online. And I just thought to myself, this is one of the scariest things left in my life, and I'm tired of feeling like this. Like I don't want to be afraid of this anymore. If I want to grab an artistic vision and go for it, I don't want to be held back by fear. I can say now that I don't feel that fear anymore. And there wasn't some magical moment that I where all the lights went on and I was no longer afraid. It wasn't like that. I just literally beat it down with volume. I just kept putting myself in front of the camera. I kept shooting. I kept releasing videos. And over time, I acquired more competence and more confidence. And I saw that at least some people were interested in the work and were complimentary of it. And then, time passed and I wasn't afraid anymore. And I don't think I ever would be really afraid to do anything artistic in my life again. So that's really all I have to say, except I want to thank you for watching my videos, however many that you have watched. I hope you found them educational or interesting or inspiring.